Mark Antony and Cleopatra. History calls it the greatest love story ever told. But what if I told you it was actually the greatest con? What if the romance that supposedly brought down empires was nothing more than a brilliantly orchestrated betrayal executed through a secret code so devastating that it destroyed the most powerful general Rome ever produced? This is the story they don't want you to know. This is the betrayal plot, the secret code Cleopatra used to destroy Mark Antony's empire. Picture this. It's 41 BC. Mark Antony, fresh from carving up the Roman world with Octavian, arrives in Tarsus to summon Cleopatra. He expects a frightened queen, desperate to maintain Egypt's autonomy under Rome's boot. Instead, she arrives on a golden barge that looked like it sailed straight out of mythology. Silver oars, purple sails soaked in perfume. Cleopatra herself dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by boys dressed as cupids, women posed as sea nymphs. The air itself seemed to shimmer with incense and seduction. Mark Antony, the conqueror of Gaul, the avenger of Caesar, the man who'd seen 1,000 battlefields, was mesmerized before she even spoke a word. But here's what nobody tells you. That barge, that costume, that entire theatrical production, it wasn't romance. It was psychological warfare. Cleopatra had studied this man. She knew his weaknesses, his ego, his need to be seen as Alexander reborn, his deep-seated resentment of Octavian back in Rome. She knew that Mark Antony didn't want to be just another Roman administrator. He wanted to be a god king, and she was about to give him that fantasy, while slowly, methodically, stripping away everything that made him dangerous to her. The first phase of her plan was intoxication, not just with wine, though there was plenty of that. Intoxication with luxury, with power, with the illusion of unlimited possibility. Alexandria wasn't just wealthy. It was obscenely, impossibly, mind-bendingly wealthy. The Library of Alexandria held the knowledge of the known world. The lighthouse guided ships from 3 continents. The palaces made Rome look like a provincial backwater. Cleopatra didn't just seduce Mark Antony. She seduced him with an entire civilization that made him feel like Rome was the past and Egypt was the future. And then came the gifts, enormous, staggering, politically catastrophic gifts. Cleopatra convinced Mark Antony to give her Cyprus, Crete, Cyrenaica, parts of Syria, chunks of Cilicia, portions of Judea. These weren't love tokens. They were Roman territories, lands that Roman blood had been spilled to conquer, and Mark Antony just handed them over to a foreign queen like he was giving her jewelry. Back in Rome, this looked like exactly what it was: treason. Senators who had supported Mark Antony started to waver. Octavian, brilliant politician that he was, began his propaganda campaign. Mark Antony has gone native. Mark Antony has abandoned Rome for a foreign seductress.
Mark Antony is no longer Roman. But Cleopatra wasn't done. She understood something fundamental about power that most people miss. You don't destroy a man by attacking him directly. You destroy him by isolating him, by cutting him off from his power base, by making him dependent on you for everything: information, validation, strategic direction, even his sense of identity. So she began phase 2 of her plan, the secret code. Now, here's where history gets murky and where the hypothesis begins. Ancient sources hint at something. Plutarch mentions Cleopatra's spies. Dio Cassius references encrypted communications. Archaeological evidence suggests a sophisticated intelligence network operating out of Alexandria during this exact period. But the full scope of what Cleopatra built? That's been lost to time. Or maybe it was deliberately erased by the victors who wrote the history books. So let's reconstruct it. Let's talk about what the secret code might have actually been. Imagine this. Cleopatra, fluent in 9 languages, trained in mathematics and astronomy, with access to the greatest scholars in the world, creates a cipher system based on hieroglyphics. Not the simplified hieroglyphics tourists see on temple walls, the full, complex system with phonetic, ideographic, and determinative symbols that could express incredibly nuanced meanings. She maps these symbols to Greek letters using a substitution cipher that shifts based on astronomical observations, the phase of the moon, the position of certain stars, calculations that only trained Egyptian priests and Greek mathematicians could perform. Messages written in this code would look like innocent merchant correspondence or religious texts, but decoded with the proper key, they revealed something far more valuable: intelligence, troop movements, supply routes, political allegiances, personal weaknesses of key Roman senators and generals, Octavian's strategic plans. And here's the crucial part. Cleopatra didn't just gather this information. She controlled how and when Mark Antony received it. She became his only reliable source of intelligence about what was happening back in Rome. Think about the implications. Mark Antony is in Alexandria, getting more Roman and Egyptian every day. He's wearing Egyptian clothing, participating in Egyptian religious ceremonies, even declared himself and Cleopatra the new Isis and Osiris. Meanwhile, his intelligence about Rome comes entirely through Cleopatra's network. She tells him Octavian is weak, that the Senate is divided, that his supporters in Rome are holding strong. She feeds him exactly the information that will keep him confident, comfortable, and most importantly, in Egypt, away from Rome, away from his power base. But the network went deeper than just gathering intelligence. Cleopatra had agents embedded throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, Egyptian merchants who were actually spies, slaves in Roman households who reported back to Alexandria.
Even some of Mark Antony's own officers might have been compromised, either through bribery or blackmail or the promise of wealth and position in the new Egyptian-Roman hybrid empire that Cleopatra was supposedly building with Mark Antony. And here's where it gets truly diabolical. Cleopatra used this network not just to inform Mark Antony, but to misinform his enemies, and occasionally to misinform him. She could feed false intelligence to Octavian through compromised channels, making him overcommit to certain strategies. She could delay messages from Rome to Mark Antony, ensuring he heard about critical political developments too late to respond effectively. She controlled the information battlefield completely. And in warfare, especially political warfare, controlling information is more powerful than controlling armies. The donations of Alexandria in 34 BC perfectly illustrate this strategy. Mark Antony, in a massive public ceremony, formally gave away vast Roman territories to Cleopatra and their children. He declared Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, the true heir of Caesar. He essentially announced that he was creating a new empire, an Eastern empire, centered on Alexandria, not Rome. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was the culmination of years of Cleopatra carefully, systematically reprogramming Mark Antony's entire conception of where power should reside and who deserved to wield it. Octavian's response was predictable. He had his propaganda weapon. He convinced the Senate to declare war, not on Mark Antony, a Roman citizen in triumvir, but on Cleopatra, a foreign queen. Legally, brilliant. Morally, devastating. It forced Mark Antony to choose: abandon Cleopatra and return to Rome, or commit fully to defending her, which meant effectively going to war with Rome itself. And because Cleopatra had spent years isolating him, weakening his ties to Rome, building up his identity as an Eastern monarch rather than a Roman general, there was only one choice he could make. He chose Cleopatra. He chose Egypt. He chose war. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC should have been Mark Antony's moment. He had the larger fleet, more ships, more men, experience and tactical genius. But something went catastrophically wrong. His ships were slow, undermanned, poorly coordinated. Critical supplies never arrived. Intelligence about Octavian's fleet positions was inaccurate. And at the crucial moment of the battle, when everything hung in the balance, Cleopatra's 60 Egyptian ships suddenly broke formation and fled, just sailed away, abandoning the battle entirely. Mark Antony, seeing her ships retreat, made a decision that historians have been trying to explain for 2,000 years. He abandoned his own fleet, jumped into a smaller, faster ship, and chased after Cleopatra, left his own men fighting and dying while he pursued the woman who had just apparently deserted him in the middle of the most important battle of his life.
His fleet, leaderless and demoralized, surrendered. Octavian won without even really fighting. The war was essentially over. Now, here's the question nobody wants to ask. Why did Cleopatra's ships retreat? The official story is that the battle was going badly, that she panicked, that she fled to save herself and her treasure. But what if it was the secret code in action? What if the entire Battle of Actium was set up to fail from the beginning? Think about it. By 31 BC, Cleopatra had to know that defeating Octavian militarily was becoming increasingly unlikely. She'd seen the intelligence, she knew Rome's resources. She knew that even if Mark Antony won this battle, there would be another, and eventually, Rome's superior logistics would grind them down. So what if she had already started negotiating with Octavian through back channels? What if she'd used her intelligence network to send out feelers, to see if she could cut a deal that would save Egypt, even if it meant sacrificing Mark Antony? Ancient sources mention mysterious meetings, emissaries moving between Alexandria and Rome in the months before Actium. What if Cleopatra's retreat wasn't panic, but strategy? What if she deliberately baited Mark Antony into abandoning his fleet, ensuring his defeat, ensuring he would be blamed for the catastrophe, ensuring that Octavian would see him, not her, as the primary enemy? After Actium, Mark Antony was finished, politically and psychologically. He retreated to Alexandria, withdrew from public life, fell into deep depression. Meanwhile, Cleopatra was frantically trying to salvage something. She sent multiple emissaries to Octavian, offered him treasure, offered to abdicate in favor of her children. Some sources even suggest she offered Octavian the same seductive treatment she'd given Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Anything to survive, anything to keep Egypt independent. In Mark Antony, he was barely in the picture. The great romance had turned into a desperate woman trying to cut a deal, while the man who loved her fell apart. When Octavian's forces finally reached Alexandria in 30 BC, the endgame played out with almost scripted precision. Mark Antony received a false report that Cleopatra had killed herself. Whether she sent this message deliberately or whether it was a miscommunication remains one of history's great mysteries. But the result was inevitable. Mark Antony, broken, betrayed, defeated, fell on his own sword. The great general of Rome died in agony, bleeding out in a servant's arms, having thrown away everything for a woman who might have been claying him from the very beginning. But he didn't die immediately. In his final moments, Mark Antony was carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had locked herself in with her treasure. She couldn't open the doors for security reasons, so she had him hauled up through a window with ropes. Imagine this scene.
The greatest general Rome ever produced, dying, being pulled up the side of a building like cargo, while the woman he'd given everything for watched from above. He died in her arms, supposedly professing his love, supposedly forgiving her for everything. History loves this moment, the tragic finale of the world's greatest romance. But what if Mark Antony's last words weren't forgiveness? What if they were realization? What if in those final moments he finally understood that he'd been played, that every gift, every night of passion, every whispered promise had been a move in a game he never knew he was losing? We'll never know, because Cleopatra controlled that narrative too. She told the story to the historians who survived, and dead men don't contradict legends. Cleopatra's own death came days later. The famous asp, the snakebite, the queen of Egypt dying like an Egyptian goddess in ritual suicide. Except, here's another question. Did she actually kill herself? Or did Octavian, now master of the Mediterranean, decide she knew too much, that her intelligence network, her secrets, her ability to manipulate powerful men made her too dangerous to leave alive, even as a captive? Some ancient sources suggest her death was too convenient, too theatrical, too perfectly timed. Octavian needed Cleopatra dead to consolidate his power. A live Cleopatra, even in chains, would have been a symbol, a rallying point, a reminder that Rome could be challenged. But if he had her executed, he'd look like a tyrant, murdering a queen. But if she killed herself, tragically, dramatically, in the Egyptian manner, then she was just another barbarian, unable to accept Roman civilization. So maybe the asp was Octavian's final move. Maybe he gave her the choice: kill yourself and I'll spare your children, or I'll execute you publicly and hunt them down afterward. Maybe Cleopatra's last act of agency
was choosing the manner of her own death. Or maybe the whole thing was a Roman fabrication, and she died of poison administered by agents who needed a witness dead. Here's what we know for certain. After Cleopatra died, Octavian systematically destroyed every trace of her intelligence network, executed key advisors, burned documents, dismantled the communication systems, hunted down spies throughout the Mediterranean. The secret code, whatever it actually was, disappeared from history. And maybe that was the point. Maybe Octavian understood that Cleopatra's real power wasn't her beauty or her wealth. It was her information network, her ability to know things before anyone else, to manipulate events from the shadows, to play Romans against each other while Egypt benefited. So was Mark Antony's love real? Did Cleopatra love him back? Or was the entire relationship a calculated intelligence operation that happened to involve sex, luxury, and the appearance of affection? Here's the truth that makes everyone uncomfortable. It could be both.
Cleopatra was brilliant enough to use love as a weapon, while possibly feeling some version of genuine affection. Mark Antony was romantic enough to lose himself in passion, while still making rational political calculations at certain moments. People contain multitudes. History is never clean. But the pattern is undeniable. Every man who got involved with Cleopatra ended up dead or destroyed. Julius Caesar, assassinated in Rome after bringing her into his bed and his politics. Mark Antony, bleeding out after giving her everything. Even Octavian, who avoided her seduction, had to hunt her down and eliminate her to secure his power. The serpent of the Nile left a trail of corpses in her wake, and every single one of them thought they were the exception, thought they were special, thought she loved them. The secret code Cleopatra used to destroy Mark Antony's empire wasn't just one thing. It was a system: intelligence gathering, information control, psychological manipulation, strategic isolation, creating dependency, offering unlimited ego gratification while slowly stripping away actual power, making the victim complicit in their own destruction, getting them to betray their own interests while believing they're following their heart. And you know what the most terrifying part is? This playbook still works. You see it in politics, you see it in business, you see it in personal relationships. The tactics Cleopatra perfected 2,000 years ago are still being used today because they exploit fundamental human weaknesses: the desire to feel special, the need to believe that this time, with this person, it will be different, the willingness to ignore warning signs when someone tells you everything you want to hear, the confusion of passion with purpose, the substitution of luxury for actual loyalty. Mark Antony had every advantage: military genius, political power, the loyalty of legions, access to Rome's unlimited resources. And he lost everything, not to a stronger army, not to better tactics, but to a woman who understood that the most powerful weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you're using. She turned his strength into weakness, his confidence into arrogance, his love into chains. And she did it so skillfully that even now, 2 millennia later, we're still debating whether it was romance or strategy, still wondering if the serpent of the Nile truly loved him or just used him brilliantly. So here's the final question, the one that should keep you awake at night. If Cleopatra could do this to the most powerful general in the ancient world, if she could build a secret code complex enough to destroy an empire, what else has been hidden in history? How many other romances were really intelligence operations? How many other great men were actually pawns who never realized they were being played?
And if it happened then, in an age of rudimentary communication and limited technology, what's happening now? In our age of digital surveillance, social manipulation, and information warfare that makes Cleopatra's network look primitive. The betrayal plot succeeded. Mark Antony's empire fell. Egypt survived for a few more months before Rome absorbed it entirely. And Cleopatra went down in history as the most fascinating woman who ever lived. Her secrets buried with her, her code unbroken and possibly unbreakable. Maybe that was her greatest victory. Not surviving, but being remembered exactly the way she wanted to be remembered. As a lover, not a spy. As a tragic figure, not a calculating operative. As a queen who died for passion, not a strategist who played her final hand perfectly and simply ran out of cards. The serpent of the Nile strikes from the shadows, and by the time you feel the bite, the poison is already in your veins. Mark Antony never stood a chance.